We begin the fifth chapter of Avoda Zara, which is called Rabbi Shmuel. I'm sorry, the fourth chapter we're up to. And the Mishnah is here on Daf Mem Tes Amud Beis, which we touched upon superficially at the end of yesterday's Shia. So today's Daf is Daf Nun, but we'll start with the Mishnah on Mem Tes Amud Beis. The Mishnah records a machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and the Chachamim regarding Makolis. Makolis is, again, as we said yesterday, an idol that apparently is meant to guide people in their travels and in their economic affairs. And it's made of a heap of stones. And they would actually throw stones at this heap as part of their idolatrous worship. The Mishnah is addressing the case where you found stones in proximity, and we'll see what that means by proximity, to the great idol, this great heap called Markolis. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Sholosh Avonim Zu B'tzad Zu, if he found three stones, even if they were laid down one next to the other, but not one on top of the other, B'tzad Markolis, but it was adjacent or somehow in the context of Margolis, Asuros, in other words, we're going to assume that these stones came from the Margolis, and therefore they were part of the idolatrous worship of the Margolis. And we assume that these stones were previously used to throw against the idol, and they became prohibited. And we're not saying that the three stones are structured in a way that indicates that they themselves are a second idol, but rather they broke away from the first idol. Shtayim mutaros. This we don't understand. Why should we believe that if it was only two stones, it's not? I mean, they're adjacent to the Markolis. Why don't we assume they were part of the worship of the Markolis? So that we'll have to see the sugya. Chachamim omrim sheniros imo asura sheneniros imo mutaros. The number of stones you find is totally irrelevant. What's relevant is whether or not they indicate that they were once part of the Markolis. Bishlem Rabbanon, I understand the Rabbanon. Kasavri, they're of the opinion that ovdim lishvarim. It means that the Gemara is going to present a controversial issue about fragments of an idol, whether or not the idol worshippers continue in deference for the idol to worship those fragments. And the Rabbanim say yes. Niros imo. Therefore, let's try to figure out, did these stones that we find in the general proximity of the Markolis, were they worshipped? And if they originally worshipped, even though they broke away from the Markolis, they still have the status of Shivrei Avodas Kochavim, which means the fragments, and therefore they remain very holy for the idol worshippers, and they'll still continue to worship those stones that are now fragments. We have every reason to believe that these stones fell from the Markolis, and therefore they are shvarim, asuros. If, on the other hand, these stones are, at a distance, and therefore we don't conclude that they fell out of the Markolis and that they were worshipped as such, therefore they're mutter. So that makes sense. Ella Rabbi Shmuel, my kasover. Rabbi Shmuel, no matter which way you slice the cake, is going to be difficult in his distinction between three stones or less than three stones. I ovdim l'shvarim is afilu tarti nami litzar. I mean, literally, the Gemara is saying even two stones should be prohibited if Rabbi Yishmael agrees in principle that the idol worshippers continue to worship even after the Shavira, even after it becomes fragments. But you shouldn't translate it literally here as two stones. It's even one stone. If, on the other hand, Rabbi Shmuel holds, and again, this seems like a psychological or cultural machlokas about idol worship, but now the Gemara is maintaining that according to Rabbi Shmuel, they don't continue to worship the fragments that broke off the idol. Is an afilu tlasnami. Lo. Even in the case we found three stones, what difference it make? If you're telling me they don't continue to worship the fragments, then these three stones are after bittul. In other words, there's no avodah zarah applicable to the three stones. So Gemara answers, Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amar Rav Yochanan, v'yadua shenashru mimenu. So all indications point to the direction that these stones fell out from the Markolis, and therefore divrei kol asuros. Meaning, according to Rabbi Yochanan, everybody agrees, and this is not an issue at all, that they continue to worship the fragments. Oh, but what we have a mandiyama that says, Ein ovdim l'shvarim. And the Gemara says, wait a minute, how are you going to reconcile Rabbi Yochanan with that shita that holds that the idol worshippers did not continue to worship the broken down idols when they are fragments? Hani mili, when do we say that a person would not continue to worship the stones? That's avodas kocham delav hainu orche. In the accepted mode of idolatry, they don't worship fragments. Aval hach, but here is a different case because these stones fell from the Markolis. They were once part of this massive heap of stones that were clearly worshipped. So these stones were worshipped. This is not a case of, you find a stone and the question is, did he worship the stone? Did he not? So then you're going to say, well, we hold ein ovdim l'shvarim. They don't worship these small pieces. But here, these are stones that were originally worshipped as part of the Markolis. And hainu urche. In other words, it's not unusual for the stones to fall away from this heap. And therefore, we would assume that the stones of Markulis, since they were never actually cemented together, they are prone by nature to be separated from the Markolis. And therefore, says Rabbi Yochanan, if it's urche to have these fragments as broken parts of the original Markolis that was worshipped, then it continues according to everybody, even if you hold the general ein ovdim l'shvarim, to maintain the status of avodah zarah. So what then is the issue that divides Rabbi Shmuel from the Chachamim? And the answer is bistama. We don't know exactly where these stones came from. If we would know and determine for sure that they came from this heap that was worshipped in the Markolis, and it's normal for the stones of this heap to be separated from the heap, everybody would agree it's also. But here in the case of Stama, where we don't know for sure that these stones were actually part of the Markolis and they were worshipped, then we're going to have to determine the proximity to the Markolis, and that's going to give us like circumstantial evidence that might indicate whether it was part of the Markolis or not. Nami, if the stones are very close to the Markolis, that means within an amma of a radius, is the Nofel. We have every reason to believe that this Evan fell out of the heap of the Markolis. Is the Kol Asuros? Then everybody would agree that even though we don't we can't be 100% sure, but we are very, very certain that this is not just a fragment, and the question is whether they worship, that this was actually part of the Makolos, and it's normal for it to fall away. Ki pligi meruchakos. What happens if it's at a distance of 4 amos away from the Marcolis? And here we cannot assume one way or the other. We can't assume that it definitely fell from the Marcolis. We can't assume that it definitely did not fall from the Marcolis. So, in a certain sense, the Gemara at this point is going to take a little bit of a break and go through all these principles and svaras that we mentioned. So, number one, Rabbi Yochanan said that that if the stones definitely fell from the Marcolis, even if I hold Ein Ovdim L'Shvarim, it doesn't matter because it was worshipped as part of the Marcolis and it was normal for it to break away. So the Gemara says, V'ha b'tzad Marcolis Ketani. You just finished saying that if I find these stones in close proximity to the Marcolis, and if I have to assume they fell out of the Marcolis, everybody agrees it's also. But wait a second, the Mishnah itself is talking about such a case of Bitzad Marcolis. So don't tell me, Rabbi Yochanan, that if you find a stone right near the Marcolis, everybody agrees it's also. That's not so. The Machlokas itself in our Mishnah, recorded as Machlokas Rabbi Shmuel and the Chachamim, is talking about a case where he found it in close proximity. So the Gemara reinterprets the Mishnah. My tzad, what did the Mishnah mean that it's in close proximity to the heap? Bitzad arba amos didei. It's not within 1 amma, because then Rabbi Yochanan's principle would be it definitely came from the Marcolis, and everybody agrees it's also, and we don't apply the principle of Ein Ovdin L'Shvarim. But rather, you found it somewhere in the radius beyond 1 amma, but within 4 amos. So we're going to create a radius of 4 amos. If the stone that you found, even one single stone, was within 1 amma, then everybody agrees it's awesome. The machlokus is 1 amma plus ad until 4 amos. Rabbi Shmuel Sover also Marcolis Kata B'tzad Margolis Gadol. Rabbi Shmuel holds that even if I grant you that since it's not within 1 amma, but rather it's beyond that 1 amma, therefore I don't have any reason to assume that it definitely came from the Marcolis, but nevertheless I have another reason why I'm going to prohibit this, and herein is going to lie the difference between 1, 2, and 3 stones, and that is that Rabbi Shmuel's of the opinion that, again, if you go through the culture of paganism, what you'll find out is that very often they create another deity like the Marcolis by setting up 3 stones in addition to the great heap of the Marcolis. Shalosh didamyun lemarcolis. Now, if you find 1 stone or 2 stones, that's not the beginning or the end of creating a competitive Marcolis or an alternative Marcolis. But if you find 3, that already is similar to the structure of a standard Marcolis. And therefore, asuros. Shtay mutaros, period. Rabbanan Savri ain't also Marcolis Kata B'tzad Marcolis Gadol. We don't want to compete with the great Marcolis of a great giant heap. And they're not going to make another Marcolis next to that Marcolis. Is therefore Loshna Shalosh Loshna Shtayim. The numbers of stones are totally irrelevant because you didn't find it within with the proximity of 1 amma next to the Marcolis. Is therefore the principle is that it depends on Niros Imo Asuros Shein Niros Imo Mutaros. it all depends upon niras imo or lo niras imo. Do the stones that you find appear to be within a certain close proximity, although we reject the existence of a construction of a secondary mykolis near the primary mykolis, but rather the one factor that determines a particular stone, whether it's forbidden or not, is whether or not it is close enough to have fallen from the mykolis mount. Those stones, whether they're one, two, or three is irrelevant, might reasonably have come from the mound, meaning the great giant mykolis, and therefore they're forbidden. But those that are more distant, and we have no reason to assume they came from the mykolis and they were worshipped, and we don't believe that they will create another mykolis in close proximity to this one, therefore they're mutter. Omar, let's go back to Rabbi Yochanan. If we know that they had worshipped the mykolis and this stone that fell away was within the mykolis and it was worshipped, they're forbidden. Everybody agrees they're forbidden. Uramini, how can you tell me such a thing? And it's based on the fact that, again, after the great idol was fragmentized, the idol worship still retain idol worship vis-a-vis that segment, that stone, that shever. But we have now a stira reminu avonim shenashru min hamakoles. On this itself, where the stones fell out of the makoles, we're going to have machlokes, Rabbi Shmuel and the Chachamim. According to the Chachamim, niros ima asur shein niros ima mutaros. So don't tell me, Rabbi Yochanan, that if we find the stones in close proximity to Makolos, everybody agrees that they remain awesome. We did Avoda Zara, Rabbi Shmuel, Omer Shalosh Asur Shnai Mutaros. And here we're talking about Avonim Shenashru Min HaMarkolos, meaning we know that they came out of the Markolos. And the whole issue seems to revolve around whether or not they would construct a second Markolos. Omar Rava, no. Rava says you have to change the brisa. Lo Tema, don't read it. Shenashru, we know that they fell from the Markolos. In that case, Rabbi Yochanan is right. Everybody agrees it's Asur. Ela Ema Shenimtzeu. We don't know that they fell out of the Markolis, but it looks like that because you found it in close proximity, and that's what the Rabbanan say it's Asur, or you didn't find it that close but further away, and therefore it's Mutter. And Rabbi Shmuel is going to argue that it depends whether you see a formation of a new Markolis, namely 3 stones. So once again, this, I call it Hakafa Aleph of Hasugi, is the Hakafa of Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan insists that the issue is beyond the 1 amma distance from Makos, but within 4 amos. So since, if it would have been within 1 amma, then everybody would agree that it's awesome. Even if you hold that Shvar Meinam of Ovdim Shvar, doesn't matter. The machlokas is beyond 1 amo, where we really don't know if it fell from the Markolos or not. But Rabbi Shmuel says if you find 3 stones, then you have reason to believe that they created this approximate or alternative Markolos. I don't get it. We've been assuming that Rabbi Shmuel only prohibits within a radius of Dalet Amos, and it's got to be 3 stones. What about 2 stones within Dalet Amos? Then Rabbi Shmuel would agree that it's mutter. Why? Because it's beyond one amma, so we don't know that it was part of the Markolis. And number two, it's not a new Markolis because there are only two stones and not three. Vasanya, Frekti Gemara, I have a brayso that says Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Shtayim bitfisalo asuros, Shol shafilu mruchakos asuros. Again, let's review. According to Rabbi Yochanan, if you found these stones beyond the 4 amos radius of the Markolis, and everybody agrees even Rishwell's mutter, but this brisa seems to be saying that if you found 3 stones, even b'meruchakos, which would be beyond 4 amos, would be asuros. Omar Rabba lo kasha, kam v'tfisa achas, kam v'shtei tfisos, v'chidami dika gavoa beini ubeini. So the issue is going to revolve around the area surrounding the Markolis, whether it's flat or it's hilly. So now we found Rabbi Shmuel in the Brisa as saying that shtaya b'tfisalo asuros, even though there are only 2 stones, but it's b'tfisa. What does it mean b'tfisa? Tfisa achas. So I'm just going to base myself on a sugya in Bava Metzia, and I don't know if it's a fair analogy, but there the Gemara in Bava Metzia says that there's something called a tfisa. Anything within close proximity is like within your grasp. You can just stretch your arm out and reach it. And therefore, says Rabbi Shmuel, according to the Brisa, if it's all b'tfisa achas and the ground is flat, so there's nothing holding back your tfisa, your ability to extend your arm and take it, then we assume it's all part of the makolis. And therefore the Brisa says that even though you only found 2 stones or 1 stone, it's us. However, our Mishnah, which differentiates between 3 stones or less than 3 stones, that's talking about shtei tfisos, meaning there are certain stones that he can grab, and then there's a hill, and there's another stone on the other side of the hill. So according to Rabbi Shmuel, let's try to get this straight. In Rabbi Yochanan's frame of reference, we are afraid of 3 stones that might have been established as a second Markolis. But yet it would seem that they are 1 stone next to the other. Fekti Gemara, Markolis ki hai gavne mihavi. Would they ever construct a Markolis that's 3 stones, one next to the other? Well, Sanya, we learned in the Brisa. What is Avnei base kulis? Base kulis is Markolis. Is achas mikan, the achas al gaben. Omarava kitanya hi beikar markulis. Right, there's a difference between the original markulis and the secondary markulis. When they establish the initial markulis, they will set it up in the configuration of one stone, and a stone on top. Rabbi Yishmael, on the other hand, who's choshesh that maybe he created a secondary makolis, then the idol worshippers are not committed to the standard classic formulation of the stones when it comes to a secondary markolis. Only on the initial markolis are they careful about it. The Gemara tells the following: Beyanai Malka Chorov. Right, they completely destroyed the house of Yanai the king. So what happens? Asu Ovdei Kachamo Kimne Be Markulis. They made a Markulis idol in the place of King Yanai's former palace. I guess this is the way of demonstrating that they're the boss. Also, then a group of idolaters came along. They had their own idolatry, not Markulis. They didn't hold beans about Markulis, and they started taking apart the stones of this great Markulis. V'chifu ben drachim usartaros. They paved streets and highways. Now the question is, are you allowed to benefit from the streets and highways that are made by Markulis stones? Ikar rabbanan de parshiv, ikar rabbanan de lo parshiv. Some of the rabbis were more machmir, and they wouldn't go on these pathways. Rabbi Yochanan, one of the great saints of our generation, we'll see his name in a minute, would go down these roads, and we're gonna, I call it Pravafurmkeit, and we're gonna say, well, we're more religious than he is, and we're gonna avoid these highways. Man ninu who's benon shel kedoshim Menachem, Rabbi Menachem, Rabbi Simoy, amai korele benon shel kedosh afilu b'tzurasa dezuzah lo mistakla. So here there are like three different shitos about what it means not to concentrate and gaze at the minted coins. I'm going to go with one particular shita that says that this Rabbi Nachum was so pious that he was afraid that once he starts getting used to looking at images, like the images on coins, he might come to gaze at other images which are idolatrous. My time of demand in Parish. So what was the reasoning of that individual or group of individuals who refrained from going down these pathways? So now we're talking about a kind of sacrifice which duplicates the sacrifices in the great Migdash, our Beis HaMikdash Lahavdil. And such sacrifices, as we'll learn in a minute from a pasuk, can never be nullified. Shenemar vayitzamdu lebal pior vayochlu zivrei meis. So what is Zivchei Mesim? Here in the past we said Zivchei Mesim means Sasar, but here the Gemara has a different understanding of what we derive from Zivchei Mesim. So that which was used as a sacrifice could never become butter. Like, for example, if they collect the dam and they sprinkle the dam, or if they do, as we'll soon see in Rav, something similar to what we do in the Beis HaMikdash, there's no bittul. So that's the Mandiomar who would avoid going down these pathways, these highways that were paved by the stones of the Markulis. Even though you would say that using those stones to pave a highway is nothing less than denigrating to the idol, and therefore it's an act of nullification. No, the answer is that tikrovas avodas kochavim is eina b'teilu liola. So there's no bittul, even though they're denigrating it. This reminds me, by the way off the topic of the famous controversy after the Holocaust of reparations. Rav Soloveitchik was very opposed to taking reparations and building the state of Israel, in 1948, based on reparations from the Nazis, because he held that they were Amalekite. But he softened his stand later on when they used all these reparations to build the paved highways throughout the state of Israel. Anyway, Umandalo Parish Omar, and the Mekil said, Be'ina ke'en pniv veleka, right? But we only prohibit takrovas ovos kacham if they did it in a way and worshipped it in a way that's similar and parallels our worship, lahavdillah, in the Beis Hamikdash. Like, for example, Shechita or Kabbalah Saddam. But here, what did he do? He threw stones? I mean, that's very nice to throw stones, but that's not the way we serve Hashem in the great Mikdash. Rav Yosef bar Ava, Ikla Rava bar Yirmiyah liasrin, v'asa v'aisi mas nisa v'yadei. So Rav Yosef records that Rabbah brought a brisa. And what did it say in the brisa? It says, Ovi kolcham shehevi avonim min amarkulis v'chifa behen drachim usratios. So this idol worshiper brought stones from Markulis and he paved highways and roads. Mutaros.